I'll be quite honest. The Black Phone was not a movie that I was really anticipating this year. It was not like one of my most favored movies or one of the ones that I was jumping to go see in theaters. But after two watches, I actually really did like this movie. First time that I viewed it, it was really great. Second time, just equally awesome. And in this review, I think I just want to break it down a bit, just go through the movie. And this will contain a few spoilers. I'm not going to go into major details about it. I think it's kind of obvious with how the movie is presented in the trailer that it shows quite a bit and how it's going to unfold. But let's just jump right into it. In this horror thriller, a slew of child abductions leads to terror in the city of Denver during the 1970s as a killer dubbed the Grabber kidnaps and murders 5 teenagers. When Finney Blake, a reserved, mild-mannered boy, is a sixth target and held captive in the killer's basement, it turns into a fight for survival as his only means of escape is by communicating with the dead via the black telephone. Starting this off, I'd like to mention one of my favorite things about the movie. It's hands down the performances. Ethan Hawke, let's just talk about that. The Grabber, his versatility with the Grabber, the mask that he wears, like each mask that kind of shapes the mood that he's in. He goes from being kind of menacing and domineering and having a deep voice to being kind of childlike and friendly, which is, let me just say, kind of...
Made you some breakfast.
What'd you put in that?
Salt and pepper.
I guess my mind, where I was going at with it, was inferring something darker because he has like this thing where he plays with Finney's hair and goes down the basement. He's like, I just wanted to look at you. I just wanted to look at you. And I don't know if he was crying. I forgot, but that was a little unsettling. I'm not going to lie. I feel like it hints at certain other things, but it doesn't ever cross those boundaries or lines. Aside from the Grabber, I think Madeline McGraw as Gwendolyn Blake and Mason Thames as Finney Blake is just an awesome dynamic. They have so much chemistry, and it really kind of shifts this perspective of seeing everything from the children's view or how they're dealing and navigating with their struggles in school. There's a lot of violence. Let me just say that. A lot of fights going on within the movie with these kids dealing with bullies. And there are darker themes within the movie as far as the children, Finney and Gwendolyn, what they're dealing with. Their father, Terrence, I believe, who is an alcoholic, who is abusive. There's quite a bit of child abuse in this movie. And it is painful to watch. I think that scene with Terrence and Gwendolyn, when he is punishing her because she is clairvoyant and she's having these dreams, that was a little bit much to deal with just because the performances that were given, especially from Gwendolyn when she's screaming and crying, it was pretty visceral and it was really emotional. That definitely elicited a lot of an emotional response out of me, at least. So it's very interesting seeing that duality where like you're dealing with like people that are real, that are dealing with actual horrific things aside from dealing with the severity of the situation with this serial killer on the loose and the investigation that's taking place. They're dealing with matters that are personal and in the home. Let me just say, I don't like Terrence. Even at the end when he's kind of like, I'm so sorry, like I shouldn't have been like this, I love you both, but it's like, you're kind of a piece of shit. I'm just going to be honest. Not a good father. Just not an appropriate way to handle things. I'm just going to say that. But I think it's really interesting that the father is trying to prevent her from having these dreams or talking about these dreams when in the end, Gwen, her dreams are what's going to aid in the investigation. But I think more so than that, Finney, like with how he handles it, it's like at the core of it, the message of having the courage, that really comes forth in the end. And I think it's a really great message. And I love the performances, like I said. Aside from the performances, I do love the cinematography. I think that's really well done. I think the visuals are really appealing. I feel like that's a word that I use a lot. And not only that, but the dreams that Gwen is having is shot on an 8mm film. So it's very reminiscent of Sinister with that type of film style that Scott Derrickson is going for. And I think it's not as effective for me as it was in Sinister. I think Sinister by far is still a creepy movie. I think I still find Bagul, that demon, terrifying. But I will say with the Black Phone, it is very entertaining. It's just not as effective for me. Another thing that I really enjoyed was that it doesn't really give you much information about the Grabber, which I know. I know. So many people seem to complain about this. They want more of the grabber. They want him more on screen. They want to know more of his backstory, which I think it's done intentionally just because they're going to possibly make a prequel. I don't know for sure. They probably are. But I actually like that they held back and didn't give you so much information. I think that goes back to what I said in the beginning of why it's so alluring is because you don't get that much information and it makes you kind of, it just leaves the door open for like interpretation, especially with his traumas, because toward the end, the grabber, this is kind of a spoiler, sorry, but Finney removes his mask and he goes into like a frenzy, starts going like batshit crazy, just not being able to function without the mask. And I think that has to do with probably his upbringing or kind of how he is as a person now, probably with, like I said, past traumas, things that he had to deal with, because he does go into like moments of regression where it's like what I said before, how he is talking kind of in a dominating, very domineering, very sadistic and creepy manner, but then he goes and regresses to like this childlike state. So it's a very interesting character. I would love to like actually know more about him, and hopefully if there is a prequel, to know more about his backstory, why he is the way that he is. I found this article on EWeekly that I found really fascinating. It discusses basically how they, when I say they, Scott Derrickson and then everyone from the Blumhouse team got into contact with Tom Savini, who was in charge of the mask, designing the mask. Tom just came back with something that was head and shoulders above everyone else, says the director. He's Tom Savini, laughs. I thought we would get something more unique from someone younger. I was wrong. It's an old legend that still delivers. The only reference I gave him was a man who laughs for the smile mask. Other than that, I didn't really have any reference. He came back pretty quickly with a sketch that's basically the mask that you see on screen. As soon as I saw it, I went, my God, that's it. Reading that article, I was actually really thrilled, and just knowing more that Tom Savini was a part of this, because I didn't know it previously, and I'm like, what is wrong with you? Really should have done my research a little bit more ahead of time with everything that was surrounding the film, as far as not just the cast, but like the crew and everyone involved within the movie. But I was pleasantly surprised that Tom Savini was involved in this, and it makes sense because the mask is really, I personally think it's going to be a really great Halloween mask. And I just love the attention to detail that Tom Savini put into this work. It really shows the variations of mask. It's just really incredible. Just reading this entire article, there's more I could actually discuss. At some point, I'm going to put up the image of the inspiration behind the mask, because that character in that movie from the 1920s is genuinely creepy, and I could totally see it being the inspiration. Another thing that I wanted to point out is that the grabber is a part-time magician, and it immediately made me think of Montag the Magician from The Wizard of Gore, which is fantastic movie. If anyone has not watched it, definitely give that a shot, because I talked about it in one of my videos. And finally, I wanted to do a comparison between the short story by Joe Hill and the movie. So this short story is about 30 pages or so, I would say. The film adaptation basically just expands on that, obviously, but it does tweak a few things within the short story. Like, for example, the grabber was, in the short story, he was a clown, and he was referred to as grotesquely fat. So obviously in the film, he's not like that. Ethan Hawke does not fit that description, and he was changed into a magician, a part-time magician, which I actually like that they went with that direction, going with the magician. And I believe the inspiration behind the clown in the short story is John Wayne Gacy, a murderer from the 70s. Another difference is that in the movie, the sister is Gwen, and she is younger than Finney. Whereas in the short story, the sister is, I believe, 3 years older, and her name is Susanna. So that was another change that they made. Bruce Yamada in the short story is the one that basically speaks to Finney the entire time and directs him on how to use the phone as a weapon. Whereas in the film, it's his friend Robin doing that. And you see Finney communicating with various different victims. Whereas in the short story, he's only speaking to one person. There's only one person, being Bruce Yamada, who speaks to him. And again, there's no reference to the killer wearing a mask within the short story. it's only adapted into the movie. There's very little mention of Gwen's abilities, or I should say Susanna's abilities, in the short story, whereas in the film, you get to see it more with Gwen. And another thing would be that the mother is obviously deceased within the context of the movie. But in the short story, it mentions that the mother actually left the father and they had kind of a domestic dispute or disagreement. Those would be the only things that I would mention about the differences or comparisons with the movie and the short story. Another thing that I really wanted to mention within the context of the film was the temporal continuity or the spatial continuity as well. I think the setting of it, taking place in Denver during the 70s, I think that was very idyllic. I think it was great. But even though it doesn't paint it in like a very peace and love type of way, you get to see a lot of the more grisly side of things. So the only negative, gripe, mixed feelings that I have about the film is that it's marketed as a horror thriller, but I believe that it kind of focuses or goes in the direction of a suspense thriller. And it has horror elements, but I think that's the only nitpicky little gripe that I have with the movie, is that I wish they would have amplified the horror a bit more. Like just kind of, push the boundaries a bit more. Overall, I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was great the first watch. It was great for the second viewing. I would definitely recommend watching this one. It's also on VOD, so if you have the chance, definitely watch it. Let me know what you guys think. If you like The Black Phone, if you've read the short story, how do you feel about it? But yeah, bye guys.